Hi everyone. I've decided to put together this video really quickly in response to the onslaught of emails, phone calls, messages through social media, comments online, asking for some guidance around sponsorship during this time of crisis, or really any time of crisis, but it's obviously really timely right now. What does it mean if you have to cancel or postpone your event? What does it mean if you have to give a sponsor a refund? How can you avoid giving a refund? The questions are coming in, and they more or less fit into um, kind of broad categories, and there are lots of commonalities. So you could tell us there's uh, issues on everyone's mind, but everyone is kind of feeling the same way. So I think as individuals, we all probably feel quite isolated. But actually, from where I sit, I can see that actually we all feel quite similarly. And so you could take comfort in the fact that while certainly it's stressful and maybe we feel isolated, actually all of our colleagues and peers are going through something similar. In fact, including myself, my business partner Brad Hoffman, because we have indeed had to postpone a major conference that's coming up that was coming up in a couple of weeks. So I wanted to put together a video outlining our decision-making process, what we went through and how we handled it, as well as some other options for those who prefer to choose a different path. This is me, Chris Bayless. I run a company called the Sponsorship Collective. And our focus, of course, is in providing counsel and valuations and consulting, education, software services to the sponsorship industry. So those seeking sponsorship dollars really across Canada and the United States. And so this session and most of my advice is actually focused on what Brad and I did, how we reacted and why, the decision-making process we went through. I think it's probably most useful in a North American context, but I would imagine that the lessons learned here might make sense globally. But nevertheless, I want to provide that background and context so that you understand where we're coming from, or rather where I'm coming from. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the following broad topics themes. Ultimately, you've got three options: cancel, postpone, and move forward, none of which are easy answers or easy decisions at this point. You can cancel your event, and if you do, what does that mean for sponsorship, activations, and refunds? If you do have to offer a refund, how much should you be offering? How do you know? What can you do instead of offering a refund? What happens if you decide to move forward? What risks did we consider anyway when we decided not to move forward? Maybe some things that you should have on your radar. If you decide to postpone, what does that mean for refunds? How can you handle that? Things to consider if you're going to postpone, or at least things we considered when we postponed our event. And then some lessons learned, I think, from this, although it's still early. There are some lessons I think that we can learn about best practice sponsorship. I'm going to share some final thoughts and then some more resources. Before we dive in, I want to be very clear that I am not giving you advice as to what you should do. Beyond the following: you must talk to your lawyer, you must talk to your accountant, you must talk to your venue if you're going to have, if it's an event that you're postponing. In our case, it was, so I'm going to wrap all of this around an event, in this case, an industry conference. Our first step was talking to our lawyer, then our accountant, then the venue. And for better or for worse, our poor legal team, we have been speaking to them daily over this decision, and been speaking to our accountant probably 3 or 4 times this week alone. And we have had easily a dozen conversations with the venue. So when I tell you that none of the options are simple or easy or without cost, I want to be very clear that if your goal is to find an option that doesn't cost you any money, that doesn't take up your time, that is easy, you are not going to find that answer here. Certainly not from me, and I'm not even convinced it exists. But nevertheless, you must talk to your legal team, you must talk to your accountant, you must talk to, if you have a board of directors, your board of directors and the venue. Please do not implement any of the lessons that I'm sharing with you without doing that first. And as always, listen to your legal team, your finance professionals, your venue, review the contract, talk to your sponsors. Their opinion is far better than mine. Or rather, their opinion is far more appropriate to your situation. A lot of the questions I'm getting from people is, what if I just put sponsor logos on a PowerPoint and we do it digital? Is that good enough? And my answer is, there's no way for me to know that. Only you and your sponsors can together determine what you can do together, if anything. So please don't make any assumptions, certainly not based on anything you perceive as advice from this. So please talk to your legal counsel. Now, here's what we did. We identified right away that there are three options. We can either cancel outright, we can postpone, or we can move forward without any cancellation, right? So three options: cancel, postpone, move forward. Obviously, all three of these decisions must be vetted through legal and accounting advice and in collaboration with your venue. I want to be clear that to cancel, to postpone, or to move forward are three distinct decisions. To move forward at this point, don't consider that the absence of a decision. The decision to move forward is indeed a major choice that you are making, and it comes with all kinds of potential fallout. So what you might see as the path of least resistance, because it requires, quote, no action, no decision, that in my view is the wrong way to look at it. So we put all three options on the table and asked the question, if we were going to run this event today, would we run it? Would we run it later? Or would we in fact have our event, in our case, at the end of April? So after you've talked to legal and accounting, you must talk to your sponsors. There's no way around it. Talk now, talk often. Communicate with your sponsors to the point where you think you are communicating too much. Let them tell you that you should stop communicating with them, or ask them every time you talk to them, is this the right cadence of communication? Please, at least the position we took was that we would rather communicate too much with our sponsors than not enough. And really we move forward with that assumption. So if we believe that if our sponsors heard of our plans for the first time through an e-blast and a social media update, even when we took the position that we were moving forward before things really escalated, that was communicated to our sponsors first and then to our database. So if your sponsors hear about it secondhand or through an e-blast, I believe that is a very serious error when we're talking about sponsorship relations. So I want to be also very clear. I'm not suggesting that your sponsorship relationships are more or less important than the relationships with your ticket holders, with your attendees. That simply goes beyond my scope of expertise and experience, which is why I'm only going to comment on sponsorship. So sponsor needs may or may not trump attendee needs. That is your call. Our approach is very sponsor centric, and naturally my business is focused entirely on sponsorship. And so my commentary is really only about sponsorship. You can't read anything beyond that from what I'm sharing today. So if your choice is to cancel your event outright, it's a fair expectation, in my view, that you should plan to issue a refund to your sponsors. In some cases, a partial refund is warranted based on how much you have delivered on your sponsorship assets and activations. I think it's fair to expect your sponsors to understand the situation, right? The crisis in this case, for many, maybe all, it's completely unavoidable. But if you're canceling because of negligence or something you've done wrong, then maybe it isn't reasonable to expect your sponsors to understand. But if we're talking about a crisis that comes out of nowhere that we just weren't prepared for, I think it's reasonable to expect your sponsors to understand. But understanding is not the same as letting you keep the money. So a sponsor, a brand, acknowledging that perhaps cancellation was out of your control, that's a reasonable expectation, I think, as partners and as professionals, but it is not reasonable to expect that you get to keep the money and not deliver on your sponsorship. So So if you're thinking of canceling, I think the position you take should be that you're going to issue a full refund. However, not every case requires a full refund. And so then the question is raised, how much of a refund should you give? So I'll say right off the bat, if you're using stock gold, silver, bronze packages, that are just a bunch of logos on signs and mentions from the mic, I don't think that you're going to be giving a partial refund. I think you're going to have to give a full refund. Why? Because you're not actually focused on the outcomes a sponsor is trying to achieve. You're really just focused on vanity metrics at the event, which of course you are not going to be doing. So it also means you didn't do evaluation. So how can you know how much you've actually delivered to date, right? So if most of your assets are delivered at the event, you don't know what they're worth, and you're just kind of selling packages off the shelf, I'm not hopeful that you're going to be able to deliver a partial refund, right? So if you're still in the gold, silver, bronze world, then let this crisis be the last time you ever use one. Going forward, everything should be customized. So on the other hand, if you've done a custom package, done evaluation, you know what your sponsor's goals are, then at least you can determine how much of a contract you have delivered to date. So if you know that social media posts and doing a webinar with your sponsor and e-blasts to your database are worth 60% of the total package, then you could have an argument that you can refund the remainder. Now, this is not a comment as to whether or not you should only give a partial refund. This is purely based on whether or not it's even worth considering a full refund versus a partial refund. Before you begin negotiating with your sponsors, of course, talk to your lawyer, review your valuation, review your contract, and make the determination whether or not you're contractually obligated to provide a full refund, or whether your contract reads in such a way that they're buying a collection of assets. That's between you and your legal team, but then you also have to consider the right decision from a customer service perspective. So I do want to say, just because you're legally entitled to keep all or some of the sponsorship dollars doesn't necessarily mean it's the right call. It might be, but it still might be better for the long-term relationship and the life of your event to issue a refund. So taking a transactional sponsor approach with the sponsor today could cost you the relationship and future revenue. I'm not suggesting that you ignore your lawyers, absolutely not. But what I am suggesting is that you think long-term about what a sponsor might want, what might be best for the long-term life of your event, and whether or not that short-term sacrifice is worth it. So instead of a refund, of course, you could offer a credit for next year's event. You can offer some other properties that are happening in the same fiscal year that serve the same audience. If your sponsor had sales goals tied to sponsoring your event during a very specific quarter or time frame, then if you're going to offer something, then you need to get the same audience during the same time frame with the same outcomes to be able to transfer the funds. But again, this is a negotiation with your sponsors after consulting legal, not something you decide and tell your sponsors. So that most certainly requires multiple conversations. The reality is canceling an event is a major decision and could be costly. You already know that. I know because of the emails that are being sent to me. Does that mean, however, that you should avoid canceling? Not necessarily. In our opinion, canceling our event would have been better than moving forward. Postponing was our choice. Excuse me. Postponing was our choice in the end, but canceling was a better option than moving forward. So what happens if you choose to move forward with your event as is? So assuming events of a certain size haven't been banned and you've already been canceled, if you decide to move forward, it seems like the path of least resistance. It isn't necessarily. It's still a decision, right? If you opt not to cancel or reschedule now, the choice may be made for you later. So I'll give you a very timely example. This morning, events over 50 people were canceled in our geography. Yesterday, events over 50 people were not canceled. And so if yesterday we chose to move forward with our event, this morning we would have to cancel. So if that happens, right, if something similar happens and you kind of roll the dice and hope that things will be okay by the time your event comes up, the choice to postpone may actually reduce the choice to move forward may reduce your options, because those who acted proactively, perhaps rescheduling, will get the first choice of dates, leaving you with few, if any, options. So the choice to cancel is drastic, of course. The choice to move forward could just be delaying your choice to cancel. So again, I'm not advising you to cancel, move forward, or postpone. I'm walking you through the process that we went through internally to decide what we should do, and this featured strongly in our logic. If you choose to move forward, any of the following could come to pass. So you need to have a plan. Your event is canceled last minute. Your attendance is poor because people don't want to take the chance. You could have multiple refund requests. Even if you don't offer refunds, maybe you'll keep the money. I don't know what the legal answer is there or what the right customer service answer is there, but if you do keep the money, that could be really damaging to your relationship. Web traffic could take a hit, which directly affects your sponsorship offerings. Hotel room blocks may not be full, which means you're on the hook to pay them out of pocket potentially. Media partners may not cover your event because they're covering whatever the crisis is. In this case, a epidemic or a pandemic. In other words, moving forward could cost you money anyway, could result in a canceled event. If you don't deliver the assets, audience, and activations, you could still have to issue a full or partial refund and damage the relationships long term. So this is how we arrived at the decision that moving forward as is was probably not the best. Canceling would be better than moving forward. But for us, the choice that we made, it was the right choice for us. It may not be the right choice for you. Was in fact to postpone. Before we made a decision, we talked to our lawyer, we talked to our accountant, we talked to the venue. Then lawyer 5 more times, venue 3 more times, accountant 2 more times. This was not a quick email off to our professional services. The choice to postpone was not cheap. It cost us money. There were fees, there were lawyer fees, accountant fees, there were fees to the venue, there were fees to activations we booked. This was not a free decision. We believe it was the right thing, but that doesn't mean that it was without economic impact. And so you should be prepared for that. A cancellation, a postponement, or moving forward as is. At this point, at least for us, we came to the realization that no matter what we chose, it was going to cost us money, which kind of liberated us from even having to think about money. We could just focus on what was the right thing. And so instead, we focused on these questions, right? So instead, because everything's going to cost us money, we just made peace with it and asked the following questions. What's best for the sector and the industry, right? Brad Hoffman of Spire Philanthropy, the Sponsorship Collective. We are thought leaders in this industry. We owe our livelihood to this industry. We've been part of it for a long time. And so we feel an obligation to ask the question, what is best for the sector and the industry? And so we ask that question. What is best for our attendees, our most direct stakeholders, the people who bought tickets? If it were us in attending an event or sponsoring an event, or our loved ones attending an event, how would we want them to be treated? Do we want them to be forced to go to this event that they bought tickets to because technically speaking, there was no government mandate not to? Or is it better for us? Would we want the event planners to make a different decision? And so we put ourselves in the position of our attendees and our loved ones and ourselves. And then we ask the question, in 5 years from now, when we look back, what is the best possible choice? The one that means the long-term success of this event, or that is most likely to contribute to the long-term success. So when we went through this process, right, not trying to pick the choice that had zero financial impact, zero stress, zero logistic impact. We let all of that go, accepting that every choice we could possibly make is going to cost us money. When considered in this way, the choice is simple. We chose to postpone. So things to consider when postponing. Go through the above process. That's what we did. The problem with it, though, I would argue, is that it took us longer than we would have wanted to communicate with our sponsors and our ticket holders. Now, we were still earlier than the vast majority of events. We saw many other events sending out communications saying that all systems go, the events were not canceled. I completely understand their position. This is not a criticism of their position. It's more of a comparison. While we were later than we wanted to be, we were not late to the table. We started to get questions from ticket holders and sponsors, and that triggered to us that a decision needed to be made, but it had to be the right decision. So we were still communicating with sponsors. We were still responding to emails from people asking about tickets and what our strategies were. But in the background, we were consulting our lawyer, our accountant, and our venue to secure a new date and a new plan. Every single sponsor we communicated with directly one-on-one, but then we had a sound plan and strategy. We didn't want to come forward with a postponed until further notice. We wanted to have a very specific plan in place, and that's the decision we made early on, and we stuck to it. So every single one of our sponsors responded immediately, within minutes, to our email. Right? We offered a phone call. We're happy to have a conversation. Emails, communication sent out to deliver our position. Every single sponsor, without exception, offered their full support, thanked us for not moving forward with the event, committed to the new dates, and said they couldn't wait to work together. Not one sponsor asked for a refund or was critical in the least. So the corporate partners and sponsors at the partnership conference, absolutely incredible, the response. They wanted what was best for the industry and attendees and their staff, just as we did. So for us anyway, any fear that we were going to alienate our sponsors were met with an incredible level of support and professionalism, and it was, frankly, it was touching. We were honest and clear about the decision. We asked for feedback and presented some of the benefits of postponing. There were plenty of drawbacks, but there were also some other benefits, like more time to promote, digital activations. We have a slightly better setup now at the conference because there's more space available for the dates that we postpone to, so we can actually do more stuff with our sponsors. We are now in talks with our sponsors, at least at the time of the recording, to do some promotion and digital activations leading up to the conference. So in other words, we want to make sure that our sponsors are getting the outcomes they paid for, not a logo on a sign. That's not an outcome, that is an output. And a logo on a sign is designed to trigger some kind of an outcome. And so in talking to which of course doesn't really feature that strongly in our sponsorship packages anyway. So we are now in conversations with our sponsors. We've asked them, what is the best case scenario? How can we help you deliver in a measurable way and receive the benefit that you're paying for? How can we do it now as well as at the event? So to be clear, the things that we are offering our sponsors go way outside of the scope of the original agreement. Are we charging our sponsors for these benefits? Absolutely not. We want our partners to look back next year and say, this was incredibly valuable, the best investment we made all year, even in a time of crisis. That's the reaction we want from our sponsors. And the fact that our sponsors were so supportive and reacted so positively to our decision, Brad and I are taking the position now that we will do absolutely anything we can for these partners. And in that way, we've come together as a community, right? As you all know, I don't believe in changing the word sponsorship to partnership. I don't think that's a good strategy. But in this case, I will say that our sponsors and our event, we are working together as true industry partners, but it starts from a place of us wanting to make sure they have everything they want for their marketing investment. So if we expect our sponsors to be flexible and understanding, then we have to do the same as an industry. This is how real partnerships are built. So that was our experience. Obviously, your experience may be different, but it's worth sharing what we went through, the decision we made, and the outcomes that we had. So there are some lessons learned through this. One of the most valuable lessons is that the way to handle a crisis starts long before that crisis is even on the horizon. Yes, of course, it's important to react and have a communication strategy and negotiate and renegotiate with all of your stakeholders. However, if you're practicing sponsorship according to current best practice, then working through this together with your partners is fairly straightforward. In other words, none of our sponsors bought a gold, silver, bronze package off a shelf where we just made up the values and really consisted of nothing more than logos on signs at the event. All of our sponsors, we had something custom built for them based on the goals, their outcomes, their strategies, their plans, how they were measuring success. We built something custom for each one of them. So when the crisis hit and we had to postpone our event, we were able to sit down with our sponsors and say, I know you're trying to achieve XYZ at the event, at the conference. Here are 3 ideas we had to help you achieve those goals. What are some ways that you think we could work on together? And let's pick the ones that make the most sense for you, the sponsor, and we will do everything we can to deliver. So because we knew the goals, the outcomes, we'd done discovery, we had done custom packaging, custom valuations, while it was still immensely stressful and still expensive and still took a tremendous amount of our time, it was still far easier and more straightforward than trying to guess at whether or not a sponsor would be frustrated that they couldn't put their sign on a logo, I guess is what I'm saying. So if you have to offer new activations to your audience, you need to be sure that you can deliver the same audience at other events or digitally. Therefore, a lesson learned is to know your audience. You have to know your audience incredibly well. We always talk about 25 plus data points about your audience. You can then go to your sponsors and say, listen, we know this particular audience will be at these other digital properties or visit this particular part of our website or social media or whatever. Or we can create a webinar just for them. Do you want to work together on it? So going forward, you should always know your audience. You should always know your value. Without evaluation, the conversation around refunds is virtually impossible, right? If nobody knows what the baseline value is, how do you know how much you've actually delivered to date? This is true in a crisis situation. This is true if something goes wrong in your event in kind of normal times. Knowing your value is essential. To now go back and do evaluation and present that to your sponsors, if they don't agree with that valuation, it is going to be really challenging to talk about a refund or a partial refund. So going forward, stop guessing at what your values are worth, know your value. And of course, you have to know your sponsor's goals. When you sell sponsorship, selling a stock package, gold, silver, bronze, 3 levels from a grid is a terrible idea, even the best of times. When a crisis like this happens, it really exposes the weakness in that strategy. Use a good discovery process to understand what your sponsors are trying to achieve and how they plan to measure success. Focus on delivering outcomes, not outputs like logo placements, to your sponsors. Then if something happens, whether it's a crisis, an event interruption, or whatever, you can work with your sponsor to deliver their goal outcomes in other ways. You don't want to be starting the discovery process after you've had to enter refund territory. Now, that doesn't mean if you haven't done evaluation, don't know your audience, didn't know what your sponsor's goals were, that you can't follow all of the process that I've outlined that we followed. It just means that going forward, these deficiencies in your sponsorship program should be corrected to avoid this in the future. Final thoughts. Situations like this, we need to act quickly and we need to know our options, right? I hold the belief that you cannot over communicate, and giving your sponsors more information is better than waiting and hoping the problem will go away. When making a major decision, you have to know your legal options, your financial obligations, and your venue options. In a time of crisis, it's unlikely that the decision you will make will be easy or without financial loss. So take the time to make the right decision for your sector, your audience, your organization, and your event. Most importantly, talk to your sponsors and involve them in the decision-making process as early as possible. You do not want to have an internal meeting without knowing how your sponsors feel then making your decisions based on a whole heap of assumptions. But your first stop must be your lawyer for some advice. So where do you get more resources? First of all, check the comments section if you're watching this on YouTube. I'm going to drop a handful of articles that focus on valuation, audience data, fulfillment, sponsorship packages. And of course, you can just head over to sponsorshipcollective.com. Click on that. We have a free resources button that lists all of the free resources we offer, as well as obviously a link to our blog where we have 200,000 plus words written on our blog, packed with free information. So take a look in the comment section, head over to my website, sponsorshipcollective.com, for more resources. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much for all of your questions, and good luck.